There is a name in your family tree that may be hiding something you were never told. For millions of Americans, the story is the same: a grandmother who was part Cherokee, a great-grandfather nobody talked about, a face in an old photo. Most of those stories are just stories. But some are real, and they left a trail not in blood tests, but in old government rolls and tribal registers where a surname was written down a century ago. 20 last names, 20 doors into that hidden history. And the very final name is one that almost nobody expects. First, the truth, because it matters. Having one of these surnames does not prove you are Native American. Most people who carry them are not. And when land and money were once at stake, thousands of people falsely claimed Native ancestry they never had. So this is not a promise. It is a map. These are surnames that genuinely appear in the historic rolls of Native nations, the Dawes Rolls, the Guion Miller Roll, the old tribal registers carried by real Native families, sometimes alongside families with no connection at all. If one of these is yours, it is not an answer. It is a reason to go look. Here are 20 of them. Number 20. Colbert. It sounds French, and it is, but it is one of the most documented Chickasaw surnames in existence. It traces to a Scottish trader who married into the Chickasaw in the 1700s, and because the nation was matrilineal, his descendants were born Chickasaw through their mothers. The Colbert family produced war chiefs, diplomats, and constitution writers, and the name runs all through the Chickasaw rolls. Levi Colbert, known as Itawamba Mingo, was one of the most influential Chickasaw leaders of the removal era, and his brother George ran a famous ferry on the Tennessee River. This was not a fringe family. It was the spine of the Chickasaw Nation for 100 years. If Colbert is in your family and your roots run to Mississippi or Oklahoma, that is worth a second look. The next name sounds even more ordinary. Number 19. Perryman. A plain English-sounding surname, and a major Muskogee Creek family name. It traces to a trader named Perryman who married into the Creek Nation, and his descendants became chiefs, ministers, and newspaper founders. One branch's ranch land became part of the city of Tulsa. Legis Perryman served as principal chief of the Creek Nation, and the family threads through the entire Muskogee story from Alabama to Indian Territory. The Perryman name appears throughout the Creek rolls. If it is in your family, the Muskogee connection is real enough to chase. The next name belonged to the people who wrote it down. Number 18. Ross. One of the most common surnames in the English-speaking world, and also the name of the longest-serving principal chief in Cherokee history. John Ross, 7/8 Scottish by blood, led the Cherokee Nation for nearly 40 years through removal and beyond. The Ross name is stamped all over the Cherokee rolls. Now, most people named Ross have zero Cherokee connection. It is a huge British surname. But some Ross families are Cherokee to the core. That is the whole lesson of this list in one name. The surname is a lead, never a verdict, and only the records can tell you which Ross you are. The next name hides a war. Number 17. Lowry. Sometimes Lowry or Lowry, it is Scottish and English in origin, and it is carried by Cherokee families, by the Lumbee of North Carolina, and by other Native communities across the Southeast. The name shows up in Cherokee leadership and deep in Lumbee history, where Henry Berry Lowry became a legendary outlaw hero resisting white oppression after the Civil War. A single surname, two different Native stories. The Lumbee are a Native people of North Carolina with their own distinct and hard-fought history, and Lowry is one of their defining names. Henry Berry, Lowry's guerrilla resistance made him a folk hero across the region. If Lowry is in your family and your roots run to the Carolinas, the Lumbee thread is worth pulling. The next name comes from the swamps. Number 16. Bowlegs. This one barely hides at all, and it is unmistakably Seminole. It comes from the chiefly line of Bowleg, anglicized to Bowlegs, and it belonged to Billy Bowlegs, who fought the United States in the last of the Seminole Wars. The name appears in Seminole records in both Florida and Oklahoma. Billy Bowlegs held out in the Florida wilderness long after most Seminoles had been removed, and the name still appears in Seminole communities in both Florida and Oklahoma. If Bowlegs is anywhere in your family, the Seminole connection is not a maybe. It is a near certainty worth confirming. The next name was carried by the unconquered. Number 15. Osceola. Almost no one carries this as a surname by accident. It is one of the proudest names in the Seminole tribe of Florida, traced to the great resistance leader Osceola himself. It runs through the modern tribe's leadership right up to today. Descendants of the man still lead the Seminole tribe of Florida, and the name is treated with real reverence there. This is one of the rare names on this list that, if you genuinely carry it, points almost certainly towards Seminole heritage. The next name is far more common and far more surprising. Number 14. Vann. Short, blunt, English-sounding, and one of the wealthiest and most documented Cherokee family names. It traces to a Cherokee family of mixed heritage that built plantations in Georgia before removal, and the name runs all through the Cherokee Rolls. The Vann family's brick plantation house still stands in Georgia today as a historic site, a strange, complicated monument to how wealthy some of these mixed heritage Cherokee families became. Built, it must be said, on enslaved labor. If Vann is your name, and your family came out of Georgia or Oklahoma, the Cherokee link is well worth investigating. The next name belonged to a whole nation's leadership. Number 13. McIntosh. Scottish on its face, and one of the most powerful surnames in Creek history. William McIntosh was a Creek chief of the Coweta town, and the name threads through both Creek and Cherokee records. Most McIntoshes descend from Scotland with no native tie at all, but a real and documented branch is Muskogee Creek. McIntosh signed away Creek land in 1825 and was executed by his own nation for it under Creek law, a name that carries both power and tragedy. Roots in Georgia, Alabama, or Oklahoma are the tell. The next name is one of the most common in America. Number 12. Brown. Yes, Brown, one of the most common surnames in the entire country. And precisely because it is so common, it appears across nearly every native nation's rolls, adopted through intermarriage, through the freedmen, and through simple anglicization. On its own, Brown proves nothing. It is one of the 5 commonest surnames in America. But paired with a real family story and roots in Indian territory, it is one of the names that genuinely appears in the Dawes Rolls again and again, carried by Cherokee, Choctaw, and freedmen families alike. This is exactly the kind of name where only the records can settle the question. The next name carries a color and a history. Number 11. Bruner. A German-sounding surname and one of the most important black Seminole names on the Dawes Freedmen Rolls. Caesar Bruner led a recognized freedmen band of the Seminole Nation. The Bruner name carries the extraordinary history of the black Seminoles Africans who allied with and fought beside the Seminole in the Florida swamps. The black Seminoles fought so fiercely in the Second Seminole War that some historians have called that conflict the largest slave rebellion in American history, and their descendants carry names like Bruner on the freedmen rolls to this day. If Bruner is in your family, the black Seminole thread is a real and remarkable one to follow. The next name was hidden on purpose. Number 10. Corn Silk. Now the names stop hiding, because some Cherokee surnames are English translations of older Cherokee names, and they are unmistakable. Corn Silk is one of them, a genuine Cherokee family name that appears in the community and the records. Names like this were often descriptive Cherokee names rendered into English by census takers and clerks. These translated names are some of the clearest signals on the whole list. Because no English family ever arrived from Europe named Corn Silk, a name like that comes from one place and one language only. If a name like Corn Silk is in your family, there is very little ambiguity about where it points. The next translated name is even more striking. Number 9. Sixkiller. It sounds like it was invented for a movie, but Sixkiller is a real and well-documented Cherokee surname, an English rendering of a Cherokee name tied to a warrior tradition. Redbird Sixkiller was a Cherokee nation figure, and the name appears in the rolls and in Cherokee communities today. A surname like this does not appear by accident. The name is tied to an old Cherokee military title, a rank earned in war, and it was carried by Cherokee lawmen and leaders in Indian Territory. If Sixkiller is yours, the Cherokee connection is about as clear as these things get. The next name flies. Number 8. Hummingbird. Another translated Cherokee surname, carried by real Cherokee families and appearing in the tribal records. Like Corn Silk and Sixkiller, it is the kind of name that census takers wrote down as a direct translation of a Cherokee name. These translated surnames are some of the surest signals on this entire list, because the census takers were often writing down what a Cherokee name meant, one word at a time. No immigrant ship ever docked carrying a family named Hummingbird. The Hummingbird family is tied to the Cherokee-speaking community and to the keepers of the language and old ways in Oklahoma and North Carolina. If Hummingbird is in your family, that is a thread worth following straight into the Cherokee rolls. The next name walks. Number 7. Walkingstick. Unmistakably a translated native surname and a documented Cherokee family name that continues to this day. Walkingstick appears in Cherokee history and in the modern Cherokee Nation, carried by respected leaders and artists into the present day. Like the other translated names, It carries very little ambiguity. This is a name that came out of a Cherokee-speaking world and was written into English. If you carry it, you almost certainly already know your family's story, but the rolls will confirm it. The next name belonged to the Choctaw. Number 6. Wesley and names like Folsom and LaFleur. Here, the Choctaw enter the list. Folsom and LaFleur are among the most documented Choctaw surnames. Tied to major Choctaw leaders, the LaFleur name in particular belonged to Greenwood LaFleur, a principal chief. These names, French and English in origin, run through the Choctaw rolls the way Colbert runs through the Chickasaw. Greenwood LaFleur was a wealthy and controversial Choctaw principal chief who signed the treaty that set the Choctaw removal in motion, then stayed behind in Mississippi himself, the Choctaw equivalent of the Great Divide that ran through every removed nation. Folsom, too, was a leading Choctaw family. If Folsom or LaFleur is in your family and your roots run to Mississippi or Oklahoma, the Choctaw connection is strong. The next name is a place and a people. Number 5. Tallchief. A translated native surname carried most famously by the Osage. Maria Tallchief became one of America's greatest ballerinas, and the family name is rooted in Osage history. It is a reminder that this hidden history runs far beyond the 5 tribes of the Southeast, out into the Osage of Oklahoma and the nations of the plains. The Osage became, for a brief and dangerous time, the wealthiest people per capita on Earth, after oil was found beneath their Oklahoma land, a fortune that made them targets in one of the darkest chapters of American crime. A name like Tallchief carries all of that. If Tallchief is in your family, the Osage thread is unmistakable. The next name was written in the old rolls of the East. Number 4. Guion Miller names the Eastern Cherokee lines. This one is about a record as much as a name. The Guion Miller Roll, compiled in the early 1900s, documented Eastern Cherokee descendants for a federal payment, and tens of thousands applied. Surnames tied to the Eastern Band of Cherokee, families that stayed in the mountains of North Carolina rather than walking the Trail of Tears, appear there. Around 90,000 people applied to the Guion Miller Roll, and only about a third were accepted, which tells you everything about how many family Cherokee stories turned out to be exactly that, and how many turned out to be real. If your family has a North Carolina Cherokee story, the Guion Miller Roll is the specific record where the name may be hiding. The next name is one of the most common of all. Number 3. Smith. The single most common surname in America, and precisely for that reason, one that appears across native rolls constantly through intermarriage, adoption, the freedmen, and anglicization. 100 million Smiths have no native ancestry whatsoever. But Redbird Smith was a hugely important Cherokee traditionalist leader, and the Smith name genuinely recurs in the Cherokee rolls. The lesson is the same as with Brown and Ross. The commonest names hide the rarest histories, and only the records can tell you which is which. The next name belonged to a nation of orators. Number 2. Harjo. Now we return to a name that barely hides at all. Harjo, from the Muskogee word meaning brave or recklessly brave, one of the most common and authentic Creek and Seminole surnames there is. It runs through the Creek and Seminole rolls in enormous numbers, and it is carried today by Native leaders, writers, and artists including Joy Harjo, the first Native American Poet Laureate of the United States. If Harjo is in your family, this is not a maybe. It is one of the surest Native surnames on this entire list. And now we come to the final name, the one that ties the whole hidden history together. Number 1. The rolls themselves and the name that proves the point. Rogers. We end with Rogers because it is the perfect final lesson. It is a common English and Irish surname carried by millions with no native connection at all. And yet William P. Rogers appears on the Dawes Rolls as a Cherokee citizen by blood, and the most famous American ever to carry the name, the humorist Will Rogers, was a proud, enrolled member of the Cherokee Nation who said he was more Cherokee than anything else. That is the entire truth of this list in a single name. A surname alone proves nothing. Millions of Rogerses are not Cherokee, but hidden inside that ordinary name, in the actual rolls, are real Cherokee families whose descendants walk around today with an ordinary last name and an extraordinary history they may never have been told. Will Rogers was born in the Cherokee Nation, in Indian Territory, before Oklahoma was even a state, and he never hid it. He wore it with pride his whole life. Colbert, Perryman, Osceola, Harjo, Rogers. Every one of them adore, and the rolls are the key. So here is what to do with all of this. If one of these names is in your family, Colbert, Vann, Bowlegs, Harjo, Rogers, any of them, do not assume it makes you native, And do not assume it doesn't. Go to the records. The Dawes Rolls, the Guion Miller Roll, the Baker Roll. They are real, they are searchable, and they are the difference between a family story and a documented fact. And here is the honest part. Most channels will not tell you for every real native family hiding inside these names, there are many more who carry the same surname and share none of that history, whose ancestors came from Scotland or Ireland or Germany and never set foot in Indian territory. That is not a disappointment. It is exactly why the records matter. A surname is only ever a first clue. But sometimes that clue leads back to a nation, a clan, a removal, a survival, a whole history compressed into a name someone wrote down over 100 years ago and almost forgot. Tell me in the comments which of these names is yours, where your family traces back to, and the story you grew up hearing. And subscribe, because there is another set of names, another buried nation, and another hidden history waiting to be decoded. And next time, the name on the mailbox might be yours.